And who might you be, young man?
Simeon, I am here to offer my gift.
Yep, that's me. You're probably wondering how I ended up in this situation.
A couple years ago, I made a review of McGee and Me, a Christian kids show from the early 90s. That review is one of my favorite videos I've made, even despite it having a couple of factual errors and name mispronunciations. I even got 4 crew members from McGee and Me to watch that video. I got Bill Myers, the co-creator, Mike Jens, the animation producer, Rob Luce, the co-producer, and David W. King, the production manager, to see it. That's pretty awesome. Well, today, I'm going to be talking about another Christian kids show that had some of the same crew as McGee and Me, including one of those 4 people I just mentioned. Get ready to cross the Red Sea into the Sinai Desert, because today, we're talking about Kids' 10 Commandments. Created and executive produced by George Tawil and Rob Luce, Kids' 10 Commandments is a Christian children's animated series that follows the Israelites, who have just escaped slavery in Egypt and are now wandering in the desert before entering the Promised Land. The show stars Seth, a young Israelite boy, and the audience surrogate, who is usually the target of each episode's lesson. The show follows him and the other Israelites as they, as well as the kids watching, learn about each of the 10 Commandments that Moses has just received from God on Mount Sinai. Kids' 10 Commandments was released in 2003 and lasted for 5 episodes. Man, only 5 episodes? I thought Little Dogs on the Prairie was a very short-lived Christian kids cartoon. Well, at least it's longer than the new adventures of McGee and Me, although I don't consider that to be a separate show from the original run of McGee and Me. Anyway, despite being such a short show, what are my thoughts on it? Is it as good as VeggieTales, McGee and Me, or Little Dogs on the Prairie? Well, let's take a look and find out. Firstly, one thing that sets this show apart from the other Christian kids shows I just mentioned is that the show is explicitly set in biblical times. Like I said, it takes place during the time in the Bible when the Israelites are wandering in the desert between escaping slavery in Egypt and entering the Promised Land, around the second half of the book of Exodus. Unlike McGee and Me or Little Dogs on the Prairie, this show is explicitly set in biblical times. And unlike VeggieTales, which often retold Bible stories, every single episode is explicitly set in the time of the Bible at the second half of the book of Exodus, and there aren't any wraparound segments like the countertop segments that VeggieTales had. That being said though, the show doesn't always retell Bible stories like VeggieTales often did. In fact, many of the show's stories are fictional, made-for-the-show stories that just so happen to be set in a specific time in the Bible. Although biblical characters from the time like Moses, Aaron, and Joshua are characters in the show, most of the show's characters, including the main character Seth, are just fictionalized personifications of the anonymous Israelites from the Bible. This is definitely an interesting take on a piece of Christian media, as it's neither a direct Bible story retelling from start to finish, nor a story that just so happens to contain a Christian lesson. I don't think I've seen any other piece of Christian media explicitly set in biblical times, involve biblical characters, yet tell its own fictional stories that aren't in the Bible. That is one thing that definitely sets Kids' 10 Commandments apart from the other Christian media I've seen. Even in the couple stories that are direct retellings of Bible stories, they add additional details and story elements that weren't in the Bible. And I don't mean that like Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego worked at a chocolate factory, or the Jews and Samaritans wore shoes and pots on their heads, or the Israelites had slushies dropped on their heads when they were marching around Jericho. You won't find any silly VeggieTales-esque embellishments in the show. Kids' 10 Commandments is a very different show tonally from VeggieTales, given that it's definitely a lot less silly. That's not to say there isn't any humor in the show, but it definitely tries to tell its stories in a way much closer to how the stories in the Bible are told, while still adding things of its own. In addition to personifying the anonymous Israelites, the show also contains subplots and plot points that were written specifically for the show and integrated into the Bible story retellings. I'll get to some examples of that later. Something else is worth noting about Kids' 10 Commandments is how it teaches its morals. morals. The show is called Kids' 10 Commandments. As you can probably guess, the show's main goal is teaching the 10 Commandments from the Bible. As such, this is the kind of show that was designed to be very short. Unlike Little Dogs on the Prairie, which could have had more episodes, but just so happened to be incredibly short-lived, Kids' 10 Commandments, from its inception, was created as an intentional short-running show. After all, there are only 10 commandments, so the show could only have 10 episodes, one episode teaching each of the 10 commandments. Except, this show only lasted for 5 episodes, not 10. One thing that surprised me when I watched this show was the fact that in every episode, they teach 2 of the 10 commandments. 2 commandments per episode, 10 commandments in total, and as such, 5 total episodes. In the first episode of the show, The Not So Golden Calf, they teach both, I am the Lord your God, thou shalt not have any gods before me, and thou shalt not make unto thee any graven image. This is one of the 2 stories in the show that is a direct retelling of a story from the Bible, retelling the story of the golden calf from Exodus 32. I mean, in this episode's case, those 2 commandments are closely related, so I can understand why they might have found necessary to consolidate the 2 of them into a single episode, but every other adjacent pair of commandments is also consolidated into one episode. The second episode, The Rest Is Yet to Come, teaches commandments number 3 and 4. Thou shalt not take the name of the Lord thy God in vain, and remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. And same with episode 3 and commandments number 5 and 6, and so on. I'm not really sure if they chose to teach 2 commandments per episode for the whole show, because they did it with episode 1, and decided it'd be weird to have 9 episodes instead of 10 in a show called Kids' 10 Commandments, or if they didn't have the budget to produce 10 episodes, and so decided to produce just 5 with 2 commandments per episode. Either way, it does feel a little strange that each episode sort of feels like they're teaching 2 morals at once. In fact, in episode 3, A Life and Death Situation, I honestly thought it was going to teach 3 commandments the first time I watched it. In addition to commandments number 5 and 6, teaching honor thy mother and father and thou shalt not kill, there's a part of the episode where Seth's friend Ephraim shows Seth his father's sword, which he took without asking. And soon after that, a trio of desert bandits come and steal some items from the camp, including the sword. When I first saw this, I thought it was also going to teach commandment number 7, thou shalt not steal. But nope, that's next episode, Stolen Jewels, Stolen Hearts. Speaking of which, that's the episode where they teach the moral, thou shalt not commit adultery. I was actually curious to see how the show would teach that moral since, well, adultery isn't exactly a kid-friendly topic. That's why VeggieTales had to replace Uriah's wife with a rubber ducky when they retold the story of David and Bathsheba. To my surprise, though, they actually do pull it off without having it come across as explicit. If you're wondering how that episode goes, the Israelites begin constructing the tabernacle and bringing gifts for it. This is the other story of the show that does directly tell a Bible story, the tabernacle story from Exodus 25 to 40, which actually continues into the 5th and final episode, in Toying with the Truth. Anyway, in Stolen Jewels, Stolen Hearts, as the tabernacle is being constructed, an Israelite woman named Sarah, who's also a great singer, feels unappreciated by her husband Matthew. Another man named Simeon acts more appreciative of her, especially in regards to her singing talent. He says that his gift for the tabernacle will be a song, and invites Sarah to sing with him. Matthew starts to feel jealous of Sarah, and the two get into an argument. Sarah then visits Simeon to turn his offer down, but Simeon then coerces her into singing a romantic duet with him, and the 2 of them almost kiss before Ephraim's hawk flies above them, startling Sarah, before Seth and Ephraim walk in on the scene. I mean, she doesn't technically cheat on her husband, but that's probably as close as the censors would allow. Choosing to teach 2 commandments per episode doesn't always work in the show's favor. Again, it made sense in the first episode, but I do feel like it's a bit strange to consolidate the commandments of not bearing false witness and not coveting your neighbor's property into one episode. Each episode is between 20 and 30 minutes long, so it's a half-hour show. Perhaps if each episode was only half that length, sort of like SpongeBob, which typically had 2 11-minute segments per episode and taught only 1 commandment per episode, it might have worked better. It would have lasted exactly the same length and had the exact same budget, but not confusingly teach 2 morals per episode. I mean, Little Dog on the Prairie had a typical 11-minute long episode format, so Kids' 10 Commandments could have had the same. This isn't a massive hindrance, but it is something that could have been a minor improvement. The stories are still decently told regardless. Sometimes it can feel a little preachy, especially in The Not So Golden Calf, but I think for a Christian kid show explicitly set in biblical times, that's okay. Unlike VeggieTales or McGee and Me, Kids' 10 Commandments is a show that is pretty much exclusively meant for a religious audience, and isn't really capable of gaining a secular audience. I do like how there is a bit of continuity in the show. In the second episode, The Rest Is Yet to Come, Seth's mother mentions God forgiving them, a reference to the end of the first episode where Moses tells the Israelites to beg for forgiveness for worshiping a golden calf. And as I mentioned, the tabernacle story actually takes place over the last 2 episodes. It starts getting built in Stolen Jewels, Stolen Hearts, and is finished in Toying with the Truth. It's always a nice little treat when shows reference something from a previous episode, but it still doesn't change the show from being mostly episodic. And of course, the final episode ends with the Israelites actually starting their journey to the Promised Land, which is a nice send-off to the show. Alright, let's talk about the show's characters. First up, we have our main character and narrator, Seth. Like I said, he's the audience surrogate, and is often the target of each episode's morals. He's not exactly the most interesting main character. He's a young boy who occasionally screws up and does the wrong thing, but always tries his best to fix things and learn from his mistakes. He doesn't have too much personality beyond that. Seth also narrates a bit of each episode.
This is our camp. And there I am, coming out to feed the animals.
Unlike Nicholas Martin from McGee and Me, our main character of this show doesn't have narration throughout the entire episode. It's only about 20 to 40 seconds per episode, and it's always at the beginning of each episode, and sometimes the end as well. The purpose of the narration is usually to reinforce the moral, or to establish the premise and or story. Seth isn't always the one who screws up in the stories. Sometimes he does, but other times, he witnesses someone else do the wrong thing and tells them off. So Seth isn't completely morally perfect, but he's also not always the one who breaks one of the 10 Commandments in every episode. Then we have Seth's mother, Layla. She's a kind, loving mother, and is also rather protective of Seth, likely due to the fact that she's a widow, something Seth even mentions in the first episode of the show.
Is your mother or father at home?
My mom just left, and my dad is dead.
Just like Renee from McGee and Me having divorced parents, I'm a little surprised they decided to just outright say that Seth's dad is deceased, in the first episode no less. I'm not sure if they thought Seth having a widowed mother would give both characters more dimension, or if they did plan for Seth to have two parents, but felt the father was unnecessary, and so decided to write him off. Given that his father is deceased, Seth does shoulder a bit more responsibility, especially when it comes to feeding the animals. More on Seth's animals in a bit. There are other authority figures in the show, including the real biblical characters of Moses, Aaron, Miriam, and Joshua. Moses is a wise leader and main authority figure in the show, especially considering he led them out of Egypt and is currently in the process of receiving the 10 Commandments on Mount Sinai. Aaron is basically the second in command, although he's not as strong of an authority figure as his brother, especially in the first episode, where he's the one who suggests creating the golden calf. Joshua and Miriam mostly just act as the elders and additional secondary authority figures. Not too much to say about them. Then we have Seth's best friend, Ephraim. Honestly, he's even more bland than Seth. He's also a boy who doesn't always make the right decisions, and sometimes learns the lessons Seth learns alongside him. The only thing that's really notable about him is that he has a pet hawk named Ezekiel, or Zeke for short. Also, going back to what I said earlier about Seth shouldering more responsibility due to having lost his father, he covets Ephraim's life and belongings in the episode In Toying with the Truth, violating the final commandment. Unlike Seth, Ephraim is lucky enough to have both of his parents alive and well. Then we have Seth's animals: Jacob the bull, Rachel the donkey, Shoddy the camel, Hannah the goat, and Martha the lamb. Every episode contains a subplot involving Seth's animals, who can actually talk. Well, not to humans, but to each other. Also, Zeke can talk to the other animals too. There's also a rat named Amos, who doesn't like being called a rat, even though he is one, and insists the other animals call him a rodent, but they still call him rat. The animals serve as the show's comic reliefs, and they actually are responsible for most of the show's humor.
Oh, how can you stuff yourself at a time like this?
When I'm upset, I eat.
You must be upset a lot.
Now, if I had been there, I'd have been a bit more prepared.
Yeah, right. You'd have been prepared as beef stew.
You guys can snore all you want because I put some cotton in my ears and... Hey, guys. I was just joking, you know? Guys? Guys?
By the way, the show actually has some surprisingly talented voice actors in its cast. These include Rob Paulson, Maurice LaMarche, Jodie Benson, Jeannie Elias, and Brian Cummings. And unlike when Gray Delisle and Debbie Derryberry voiced on Little Dogs on the Prairie, they didn't use pseudonyms. You'll hear these voice actors' voices all throughout the show.
Not a trace, Moses. If they're caught in that sandstorm, Lord have mercy.
Oh, there's been a lot of traffic around here lately. Lots of traffic. What's it worth to you?
It's worth a bad case of indigestion. Unless you tell me everything you know.
Hearing you constantly complain is even more tiring.
We are tired of waiting. We want action now.
You must also thank Zeke, for it was he who found you.
He's probably just enjoying a peaceful mountaintop experience with God. Oh, Matthew, you're home. I was asked to sing in the tribute this morning.
I'm so tired. I just want to lie down on my warm blanket.
I was afraid of that. What can we do?
More baubles for our golden god.
I just wish Moses would hurry back.
How may I help you, my brethren?
I will perform wonders that have never been done before anywhere in all the earth or in any nation.
Also, our main character Seth had 2 different voice actors. He was originally voiced by Chris Marquette. However, after the first 3 episodes, he was replaced by his brother, Sean Marquette. And if that name sounds familiar to you, it's because Sean was also the voice of Mac on Foster's Home for Imaginary Friends, which premiered just 1 year later in 2004. You know, I'm surprised Ken C. Johnson didn't voice any of the show's characters, especially considering that 1, he did work on the show as a director, 2, he did do all the animated voices on McGee and Me, and 3, he's a really talented and versatile voice actor, something I pointed out in both my videos on McGee and Me. Every episode also has a guest star in it. In order of each episode, these are Tim Curry, Renee Aubergenois, Lou Diamond Phillips, John Schneider, and Tom Bosley. With the exception of Bosley, these guest stars always play the antagonist of each episode. In the first episode, Tim Curry plays Hazaka, the Israelite who suggests going back to Egypt and worshipping another god, but has an ulterior motive, and that he wants to replace Moses as a central authority figure, as well as sacrificing Jacob the bull, something he didn't mention to Seth. He's definitely my favorite of all the show's antagonists, due to his cunning personality and Curry's performance. The next 3 antagonists are similar, as they're the one who break the 2 commandments in their particular episode, and sometimes coerce another character into breaking one as well. I already mentioned Simeon from Stolen Jewels, Stolen Hearts earlier, played by John Schneider, who not only gets Sarah to cheat on her husband with him, but also steals the Israelites' gifts for the tabernacle. Then there's Jasana from The Rest Is Yet to Come, played by Renee Aubergenois. Jasana is an elderly Israelite man who babysits Seth while Layla is busy. He's basically a greedy old prospector character, except he wants to sell manna and water to the other Israelites, even though they always got it for free before. He constantly swears in the name of God, and forces Seth to dig a well inside of his tent against his will, even though it's a Sabbath, which is supposed to be a day of rest. Finally, there's Natha, played by Lou Diamond Phillips. He's the leader of the aforementioned trio of desert bands from A Life in Seth situation. When Seth and Ephraim venture outside the camp and find the bandits in their cave, Natha kidnaps them and almost has them killed before Zeke flies in and leads the adults from their camp to their location, leading to a fight and the boys eventually being saved. The only guest star who doesn't play an antagonist is Tom Bosley, who plays Ben Ami, a toy maker in the final episode in Toying with the Truth. He's a very kind man and also sort of acts like a father figure to Seth in this episode, helping him realize that he needs to tell the truth about the fact that he broke the toy chariot Ben Ami made for Ephraim's birthday. By the way, this is the only episode of the show that doesn't have an antagonist. And of course, since this is a Christian kids show, it's practically a requirement that it has songs in every episode. In the case of Kids' 10 Commandments, we get 2 songs per episode. And much like in VeggieTales, they're diegetic songs sung by the characters in the show's stories, with the purpose of furthering the story and or teaching the moral.
So much for that up in the sky, God. We fashioned a God you can see. You don't have to moan. Moses left you alone. Follow me, follow me, follow me.
I love to wake at 6 o'clock on weekdays 1 and 2. To work I go to plant and so until the day is through. It's good, good, good to work, work, work. It's what I love the best. 6 days I work, but the 7th day, well, that's my day of rest.
I want to be the boy who has everything. I snap my fingers and my wish comes true. The boy who has everything. Oh, why was I born me instead of you?
While these songs aren't nearly as catchy as those from VeggieTales or even McGee and Me, they're still decent enough and do their jobs. They're well written, and they're actually composed by James Covell, the same guy who wrote and composed the songs for McGee and Me, as well as another Christian kids show George Tawil and Rob Luce created and produced called Secret Adventures. More on that show later. I will admit, though, that many of them are fairly forgettable, and they don't stick with me the same way the songs from those other 2 shows do. I honestly forgot how many of them go by the end of the episode. Despite being composed by James Covell, they weren't written by him, and no offense to Pamela Phillips Olin, but she's not quite as good as creating catchy melodies as Covell is. Covell did write the theme song, though, which is definitely the best song in the show. The second best song on the show is All I Need Is You, the romantic duet from Stolen Jewels, Stolen Hearts. It's a really pleasant love ballad, made even more pleasant by the fact that Sarah is voiced by Jodie Benson.
Yes, all I need is you. The world that's in your eyes is where my dreams come true. Yes, all I need is you. Oh, could you be the one my life's been leading to?
She also sings a solo reprise of the song at the end of the episode, which actually plays over the credits of the episode. And of course, Jodie Benson does a fantastic job singing the song. I mean, she's the voice of Ariel after all. Any song sung by the Little Mermaid is going to sound absolutely beautiful. It's a shame that Rob Paulsen, despite being a member of the cast, doesn't sing any of the songs in the show. If you know anything about Rob Paulsen, you know he's a really great singer too. Of course, since this is an animated show, let's talk about the animation. In terms of 2003 TV animation quality, the character animation is certainly passable. The designs are decent, although I will say the Israelites look a little too white. I mean, they're supposed to be Middle Eastern, not Caucasian. I know this wasn't the first or last time biblical characters in media were portrayed as white. I'm not going to go into a tangent about whitewashing in media because, one, I don't really feel qualified to discuss that, and two, that's not the focus of this video. I personally wasn't too bothered by this myself, but I can understand some people finding this to be problematic. Moving on, something else is notable about the show's animation is how the characters are 2D animated, but the environment they're in is CGI. Sort of like the ballroom scene from Beauty and the Beast, or the inside of the bus to Atlantis from the SpongeBob TV movie Atlantis SquarePantis. The mountains, rocks, trees, and sand in the background, and even the characters' tents and the golden calf in the first episode are CGI, with the 2D animated characters on the foreground. This certainly was an interesting decision, blending these two types of animation like this, but I have to say, this was definitely the biggest turnoff for me the first time I watched the show. The CGI looks really dated. I know the show came out in 2003, but still, it doesn't look very good. Even by 2003 CGI standards, Finding Nemo has the show beat. I know the show didn't have a Pixar level budget, but VeggieTales episodes from around this time managed to have better, less dated looking CGI. And keep in mind, 2003 was a year Big Idea filed for bankruptcy. Heck, even the 90s VeggieTales episodes look better than this. There are times when the characters don't even look like they're in the CGI environments at all, and it can be really distracting, especially in the first episode. In terms of blending different animation styles together, it's got nothing on the amazing world of Gumball. I brought up Secret Adventures earlier, another Tawil Loose production that came out in between McGee and Me and Kids 10 Commandments. Just like McGee and Me, it was another Christian kids show that was mostly live action, but also contained fully animated segments and animation in the live action environment. Unlike McGee and Me, however, the animation in the live action environment was CGI instead of 2D animated, and it also looks really dated. Kids 10 Commandments CGI might look a little bit better, having come out 10 years after that show, but it's still subpar. Granted, it still looks better than some Christian CGI abominations, though unlike those, which were just in CGI trying to copy off of VeggieTales, Kids 10 Commandments blend of 2D and CGI animation was clearly an experiment, and not an attempt to rip off. I don't think the experiment totally succeeded, but I can still appreciate what they were trying to do. Overall, while not a fantastic show, Kids 10 Commandments is a decent enough Christian kids cartoon, and one that I can definitely appreciate. While not quite as good as VeggieTales or even McGee and Me, and definitely having some notable flaws, like the dated CGI, one-dimensional characters, or the teaching of 2 commandments per episode, its decent 2D animation, passable soundtrack, stellar voice cast, and unique take on telling stories for a piece of Christian media do make the show at least worth one watch. If you're a pastor or Christian youth group leader to small kids, and you want to put on something for them to watch, but they're all bored of VeggieTales, try Kids 10 Commandments, especially if you happen to be teaching the kids about the 10 Commandments. I'm sure some youth pastor out there played some episodes of the show in that situation. You can easily find the entire series of Kids 10 Commandments on YouTube if you want to check it out for yourself. I rate the show 6 out of 10. Decent, not great. To anyone who's seen Kids 10 Commandments, what do you think of it? Did you agree with my critique of it? To anyone who's never seen it, did my review interest you in checking it out? Let me know in the comments. Is this the end of my adventure? Or just the beginning?